is housed by 205.
Alright.
Oh shit. Oh my god. I'm going to say that.
Make sure it's locked.
Oh, sorry.
That's how I treat people.
It's outside of the window.
Yeah, just watch. Stand there, watch and read. Right. Anyway, it's not going to be a very long class again. Remember, the next session is not a lecture section, it's a coaching session. Right? And that's the reason why the assignment has been pushed by a week. Got it? So your assignment is due after the coaching session on that Sunday. Same thing, soft copy and hard copy. Right? Now, let me give you a quick debrief about your first assignment. This is where I'm not sure whether you were unclear about what was required or simply decided throw something there and hope for the best. Quite a handful of you over here did not answer those questions. For example, what the story is, who the stakeholders are, what were your actions, what were the outcomes, right? When these are not clearly defined, it makes it even harder to understand the situation. Got it? So, I'm going to leave it to the unit coordinator eventually to decide whether he agrees with my mark or not. Got it? I did pass all of you. But whether he agrees with it, I'm going to leave it with him. Okay? So, he makes the final copy. Now, those results will not be released. It's already been uploaded on the LMS, but you won't be able to see it until the unit coordinator gives the green light. Okay? But for now, there are some things that I want you to keep in mind. So I'm going to run through this one more time. You have your hero zero moment, right? I did not mark it based on technical challenge or adaptive challenge. I did not do that. That is eventually for you to decide. Because how I see it can be different from how you see it, right? And in the absence of sufficient information, it makes it harder. Don't look behind. It makes it harder for me to determine as well. I'm assuming every single one of them has got some adaptive challenge. The reality is, as much as Hayfetz talked about the fact that there is a distinction between technical challenge and adaptive challenge, I can tell you this much right now. Every technical challenge could come with adaptive challenge as well. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you can't just simply say it's a technical challenge as well, provided the outcome is based on the outcome that you projected. And as long as the outcome is met, then primarily it's a technical challenge, right? But let me ask you this question. So what is adaptive challenge? What is adaptive challenge? It's persistent enough to wait there. That was his punishment. What is adaptive challenge? There's punishment for coming late.
I can explain.
No, not interested.
Do.
This time I'll practice advocacy, so not interested. What is adaptive challenge?
The problem for which you don't have
Sorry?
The problem or situation occurs where you don't have like a straight plan to solve it. It's not like that you have like an action which you take and then it's ultimately resolved and you move on. It's a problem which you need to analyze, which you need to focus on like trying to solve, but you won't get the first result of it. So you learn out of the first try and then out of the second try. Then you adapt from these failures how you're going to resolve.
That's not adaptive challenge. That's an unknown solution. A problem that is got an unknown solution. But that's not adaptive challenge. That's why you got to get your head around it.
Adaptive challenge is when you have to change your beliefs and your you have to deal with your loss and You have to change your understanding
Go ahead, carry on.
regarding a problem. Like what you think is not correct. Like not technically what you think is not correct, but you have to think out of the box, and you have to change. You have to change your understanding like, from every level.
Fair enough. Any other views?
Yes, sir.
When you have to adapt to something new, when you have to get used to something new, something that you're not used to, that's called adaptive.
That's change management. That's change management. So from a leader's point of view, when a leader is trying to deal with let's start with what Wolf started with, a problem where there is no clear solution. In fact, the problem is also vague. That's the other reason why. It's not just not having a clear solution to a problem, but the fact is, the problem is vague. And because the problem is vague, the solution is unclear. That means the solution has to be discovered. To discover a solution means you got to practice experimentation. Experimentation means you got to keep trying until you discover the solution. Chances are you may never discover the solution, but the thing is you got to keep working on it, right? So in this whole process, the adaptive challenge is whose? The leader or the people?
The leader.
So this is very important. So whose adaptive challenge is this? The leader or the people?
It's
The people, right? The leaders got to deal with the people's challenge. You understand? And that's where what the two of you said comes in, right? If you purely focus on dealing with behavior, then there could very well be change management. But is this unit about change management? So what is this unit about? Is it about change management? So what is it about? It's about creating change. You understand? This unit is about creating change. Then you manage the change. Got it? So primarily it means when there is a problem, an unknown problem, a problem that individuals in the organization or the organization itself has not been exposed to before, then we have a problem that is unknown, and because we have a problem that is unknown, solutions are unclear. We need to discover that solution. What we need to do is take people out of that zone, out of that comfort zone, where we need to ensure that we deal with their mindset. We deal with their mental models. We deal with their values. That is called adaptive challenge. So it's not the problem. It's getting people to deal with a problem they've never dealt with before. Right? It is not about change management. Because change management, I tell you, change, you need to change. If you don't change, then deal with your resistance. Right? This is about preempting every single one of them to ensure that people are constantly adapting, are constantly dealing with these problems that are out there. So the adaptive challenge is dealing with people. You understand? And that's why Hafez said that it's important for leaders to get on the balcony, to analyze the dance floor, but also allow the others to get on the balcony and analyze the dance floor. Right? Which is very much where I keep telling you this over and over again. What he talked about getting on the balcony is pretty much what Wake talked about sense making. Right? So at the end of the day, sense making should not be an individual process like what Brenda Devin has said, but sense making primarily, it's a collective process. Right? A collective process whereby you must allow others to diagnose the situation. And we must not stop there, Because if we do, then primarily we are only allowing situational awareness to exist instead of creating a collective intelligence in the organization. Right? What is missing in most organizations today is allowing that participation of individuals to deal with the problem. Right? And because this is not allowed, many a times, or because this is pretty much limited or constrained by many factors in the organization, it does not allow collective sense making to occur. Right? But you see, the collective sense making does not occur unless you ensure relationship exists. Right? Which is why I told you many times the holding environment is critical. So if you're looking at the holding environment, then that's where you cultivate relationship. That's where you break the barriers down. That's where you deal with silo mentality or people who believe that they are limited to their own job, they should not care about the others. Right? You've got to break that silo mentality down. And that's the reason why building that environment is critical. Halifax terms it as a pressure cooker situation. Right? In fact, Winnicott calls it the holding environment. In fact, Daniel Kahneman calls it the holding environment as well. Why? Because Kahneman said that primarily people are cognitively lazy. They are lazy because they only focus on what they know. Right? But that is human behavior. We are constantly looking at what we understand, discarding what we don't, and refusing to see what we have never been exposed to. And as a result, if we allow individual perspective to exist, then we are stopping at situational awareness. We are not closing the loop. Right? So primarily, the minute I don't close the loop, I will end up practicing single loop learning. Got it? What is required is double loop learning. Someone must question my governing variables. And I must allow people to question it as well. Right? The greater this questioning takes place, the greater this exchange and this interaction occurs, the greater the chance that we will cultivate double loop learning. Right? So as a result, we do not practice confrontation, we practice dialogue. And that practice of dialogue is called inquiry and advocacy. Right? Inquiry, while I catch you, I take you down that ladder to go all the way down to your governing variables, but at the same time, I must allow you to do that to me. And at the same time, I bring you down and then up that ladder as well to show you how I derive with my decision making. Right? And as a result, this cannot be done unless you know where you are going. To get you to know where you are going, I must get you there. I must get you to understand where you are going. And that is called vision. Right? So I create that future. By creating that future, I am instigating change. You understand? So that future that I create is to create that change. So by creating that future and getting you to become focused and looking at the reality, the current reality, that creates that gap. As a result, that leads to creative tension. You understand? That creative tension is necessary. So back to what Halifax said, Senge calls it creative tension, Halifax calls it the pressure cooker situation, and they mean exactly the same. Because here, pure tension alone leads to frustration. We do not want to create frustration, we want to create healthy levels of anxiety. An anxiety where people are constantly looking for solutions to close that gap. Right? So I must maintain that pressure at all times. Got it? Release the pressure when the pressure gets too high, increase the pressure when the pressure gets too low. And this is where I told you Robert Fricks identified it on the basis of a tension created by a rubber band. Right? When the rubber band is constantly going to try to pull you back. And every time it pulls you back, it slides and tighten it again. Maintain that optimal tightness where people are constantly modifying their behavior, or let me rephrase and put it in a more generic term, modifying and questioning their governing variables. Right? So without that visioning, then people have got no direction to go. And without having a direction to go, then they are less likely to understand what the requirements are, or more likely to operate based on extracted cues, which means people will go into different directions, and we do not want that, right? And that's the reason why we cast the future, and then we sell the future to them, and get them to link to that future passionately, and agree to that future mentally, so that when they do their situational awareness, the cues becomes relevant. You understand? Am I manipulating their mindset? To some extent, I will have to through vision. Right? But visioning and creative tension will not occur unless you tell them the truth. Right? And that's why focusing on reality is important. So, trying to deal with something simultaneously is always going to be the most difficult thing to do. And as a result, you cannot stop doing this. Got it? And because we're going to keep doing this, we got to constantly keep trying to come up with something new. Right? And to deal with something new means I must be able to deal with information from the environment all the time. Right? But every time when new information comes in, I got to look at things from a different angle. And every time when I look at things from a different angle, I got to keep modifying my behavior. So behavior control must exist as well. So this information control and behavior control is what invention at the end of the day is all about. Understood? That is to close your entire loop for this framework. Got it? Inventing is not about coming up with a new structure. Agreed? New structure is necessary. Right? Sometimes you need to change your policies. Sometimes you need to change your processes. Sometimes you need to change your procedures. But that's not inventing, although it forms part of inventing. Inventing at the end of the day is to constantly modify behavior, right? And look at new ways of doing things. That means leaders must constantly understand and adjust the environment. Sometimes you need to work with new people, right? You got to get that into people's head. Sometimes you need to look at new ways of doing things. You got to get people to adapt to those new ways. Sometimes you need to look at information that you have not looked at before, which means mindsets needs to be opened up in order for them to do that. Sometimes it means your way of doing things has to be modified, which means now you've got to bring up those new ways to do things. Allowing people to actually practice new ways of doing things. That's inventing. Right? Which means, see, it doesn't stop here. Which means every time when I invent, something new pops up that I've not seen before. Got it? Which means when something new pops up, sense making gets triggered again. Got it? So now when I go through that sense making, I must not lose sight with the visioning. Alright? Let me rephrase that, with the vision. Because by this time, visioning should have occurred. And at all times, keeping them remembering that vision is important. So visioning is always happening when sense making is occurring. So in fact, sense making and inventing dovetails with each other. They work with each other all the time. Because every time I'm inventing, I'm sense making. You understand? And every time I'm sense making, I'm inventing. To keep all of these together, the relationship must not be broken. So relating is occurring at all times. Right? And to make sure relating occurs in a manner in which where you and I can eventually negotiate to a mutual approach, to a mutual decision, I must not lose sight of my vision. Understood? So you see, it's all happening at the same time. You understand? Now, this is critical at this stage for you because this is what you're going to apply in your 1B. You understand? This is exactly what you need to apply in the 1B. You're going to be looking at this retrospectively, right? Which means now you need to take a step back, look at what you have described, and try to utilize as many of these as possible to understand how much of this was practiced, how much of this was not practiced. You understand? Which means your hero moments could have been hero moments because without you realizing, some of these could have been practiced. You understand? Zero moments could have been zero moments because without you realizing, some things over here could have failed. Understood? So where was the failure? Where was it implemented? Where was it used? Is where your analysis comes in. Right? So if you look at your requirement for 1B, there are 3 parts to it. The report, primarily identifying broadly in terms of the things that has happened, and may even utilize that opportunity to link your hero zero moments up. You understand? And this probably is also the point at which you're going to determine whether some of your hero moments, some of your zero moments could very well have been technical challenge. Right? And if they were technical challenge, no further analysis is required. Understood? That's why I told you all 2 to 3 hero zero moments to be discussed. 2 to 3 each. Why? Because not all of them could end up being adaptive challenge. You understand? So the report is going to start putting all of this together, including your diary entries. Right? And even now, a lot of people have not done it. You plus part-time students. That's not for me to determine, it's for you to decide. Got it? Diary entries are where your personal awareness and your learning is occurring. Understood? Doesn't have to be particularly to hero zero moment, but the learning that has occurred as we went along. How did that learning help you shape? Look at the hero zero moments now different. Right? That report becomes important because that sets the stage. Understood so far? Once this is done, then you do your interpretation. That's where this comes in. Which aspects of what you did succeeded? Which aspects of what you did was failed? Right? Were there flawed sense making that you practiced? You understand? Or was there identity that played a part? Were there extracted cues that you eventually used? And was there a failure in relating because you probably failed to look at the other person's perspective? Right? By practicing advocacy, you could have failed in inquiry. You understand? And when that begins to fail, that relationship could have had a problem as well. Understood? Did you practice single loop? Did you practice double loop learning? If you practice double loop learning, how did that occur? On what basis that you're talking about the fact that double loop learning occurred? Because double loop learning cannot occur alone. You understand? If you tell me that you've done double loop learning on your own, that's very hard. Right? Unless someone triggered it and then you took a step back and looked at things from different angles. Hence, it allowed you to question certain governing variables of you at that point in time, allow you to modify your identity so that it helped you to modify your values. If you practice visioning, right? Practice visioning. Don't talk to me about vision. You understand? Because our focus is not the vision. Our focus is visioning. Because vision can be anything at that point in time. Understood? So all this eventually needs to be analyzed, needs to be assessed. Do you understand? None of you in this room is required to identify specific adaptive challenge, because there are 6 specific adaptive challenges that are there. After the coaching, that's when we'll start talking about that. For now, you have to determine whether it's a technical challenge or adaptive challenge. So all this happens in your interpretation. Understood? So report your learning along the way. How did that help you look at your hero zero moments? You understand? Interpretation. What happened well for you, what did not happen. Right? What led to the failure? Where did the success stories occur? Where did the failure come from? Understood? And then you have your third part. SKS. Got it? Stop, keep, stop. That's your third part. You understand? So after this interpretation that you've looked at, after everything that you've identified, what is it that you believe in your behavior that you need to stop? You understand? If you believe you are someone who's strong-headed, if you believe someone who's highly stubborn and refuse to look at things, then you very well have been practicing defensive reasoning. And that is something you probably need to stop. Understood? What are the things about you that you want to keep? Right? You can't be totally useless. You understand? There is something about you that must be good. What are the things that worked for you? For some people it works, for some people it doesn't. For you, what you believe worked for you. Keep. You understand? And then, what do you need to change in your behavior? What kind of modification that you need to start thinking about in terms of your values, right? Your mental models, your mindset, your belief system, which means your governing variables that you need to now modify and start. This must align to your interpretation. Understand? Don't just simply talk about it over here without it having connected based on your interpretation. That fulfills your 2B. Sorry, your 1B. Understood? Hello, understood? A lot of work to do? A lot of work to do. Right? Have you started? No. I've got about 2 or 3 people I'm sure would have started. And many of you have not. I've told you before. If you think this is an assignment you can do 2 days before due date, you will fail. Guaranteed, I tell you right now. Right? Don't ever say I did not warn you. Got it? Guaranteed you will fail this. You will fail this assignment. If you're going to wait till 1-2 days. No way you can do this in 1-2 days. Right? Because there's a lot of thinking that is required over here. There's a lot of views that you need to incorporate over here. Got it? So while I summarize this for you, you notice there are key people I've been going back to. Citations and references must be used for your 1B. Got it? You must show how you are applying. You understand? And how relevantly you are applying it. That's critical. Understood? Understood? Questions on whatever you want to clarify on this assignment?
Is it Chicago based?
Very important question. Seriously, go read the study guide. It tells you APA.
It's like the separate technical challenge with adaptive challenge.
Sorry?
You said the separate technical with adaptive.
You have to.
But just now you also said that every technical challenge also.
That's your lens. I was saying on the basis that if I see it, I may identify adaptive challenges that are there that you may not. But what is your lens? That's more important than my lens. Right? For those of you who have given me sufficient detail, it's pretty clear. Many of you did not, so it makes it harder. So now you're going to force you to think even deeper when you do your 1B. You understand? You are not allowed to change your story. Got it? You cannot incorporate a new story now. That's why your assignments are being carried. You understand? Once you submit, your 1A and 1B will be put together. So when we read, we will reread the whole thing altogether. Understood? So you cannot change your story. Can you add information to that story? Yes, you can. Can you add data that you believe by now that is important to be considered? Yes, you can. Understood? So you can add data, got it? But you cannot change your story. You understand the difference? So, why? Because at that point in time, you didn't take me seriously. Right? Some of you gave me stuff that absolutely no head, no tail. Okay? Some of you simply answered the question on the study guide when I say don't answer the question. Simply went to answer the question. Not good enough. Right? So, to me, some of your stories are nonsense. Seriously. Right? I told you to be absolutely honest with your stories. Some of you did not. So now, you cannot apply this if your story was bullshit. You cannot apply this. I can guarantee you right now, you will be caught out during one meeting. Okay? So, go and decide when you want to start, how you want to do it. Find a balance to celebrate Chinese New Year and assignment at the same time. Okay? Week after next. Remember, next week is a 0 week for the term. It's an uncalculated week. So your week 5 starts after next week. It is your 4th week. You understand? 5 starts after next week. On the 5th week when we meet, it all depends on what you have written and bring to me. Right? So let me be very clear about coaching. Some of you in this room are already clear about coaching. Others are not. So let me be clear. Don't expect me to tell you more than the fact on whether you are doing it right or wrong. You understand? If what you're doing is wrong, I will tell you it's wrong and why it is wrong. If you're moving along the right direction, I'll tell you it's fine, carry on with it. Try to do as much as you can, because Thursday is our coaching, Sunday is the due day. So you don't have much time to recover. So do as much as you can and bring it along. Right? If today you have 1 or 2 that you have started and done, show it to me. You understand? Because today the class is going to finish pretty early. Right? I think I told you last week to try to attempt something and bring it along. If you have not, then do back. You can go back. There's nothing I can do for you. Understood? Hello? Understood? So, any other questions on this? So whether this technique is for you to justify. Understand? If you determine it to be technical, justify why it's technical. Do you know why I said technical challenge can also be an adaptive challenge? Why? Why did I say technical challenge can also be an adaptive challenge? Although it's technical challenge, it could still end up being an adaptive challenge. See? If you know what adaptive challenge is, then you'll know why it could become an adaptive challenge. Right? Because of people's mindset. Understand? So sometimes a technical challenge could end up being an adaptive challenge. But the impact of a real adaptive challenge is likely to be far greater. Understood? Because we're dealing with people all the time. That's why it's adaptive challenge. Okay? So, no further questions, so let me quickly move into inventing. Let me repeat this in terms of what inventing really is. Like I said, inventing at the end of the day, is it about this? Are we dealing with policies, strategies, and structures? So the answer is yes. I cannot say no to that. Because why? You are coming up with potentially new structures, right? Sometimes existing structures may not work. So you may have to adjust existing structures, because sometimes existing structures, existing policies, existing procedures were created for past problems, right? When suddenly we are now encountering something new, then maybe we may have to reconsider the current structure, policies, and strategies that we may have, right? But you see, if a structural change can solve the problem, if the policy changes can solve the problem, if system changes can solve the problem, then actually it may not necessarily be adaptive challenge. You understand? It could very well have been a simple technical challenge. But an adaptive challenge comes along, although when we know that all these eventually needs to be touched upon, we need to understand that when it doesn't work, then we are eventually also dealing with people issues. Understood? And that's when we have to realize the adaptive challenge exists. Right? So when we are trying to control that situation over there, what we are trying to manage over here. So when it becomes an adaptive challenge, what are we trying to manage over here? See, I created something, I've created a future, I created a vision, and I tell them that's the destination that we are trying to go to, right? But to be honest, we are in a hopeless situation right now, because I'm going to tell the truth. You understand? And that's why Jim Collins said, you got to tell people the brutal reality. You got to help them face brutal reality. But the minute the reality becomes brutal, what do I instigate? What do I instigate in people?
Fear.
I instigate fear in people. Right? Fear of what? Fear of loss. You understand? So you see, this is where, without inventing, I create that fear, and if I don't address that fear sufficiently, then the people will end up committing suicide. You understand? They will run like hell. Right? So which means, when I'm prepared to create that fear, when I'm prepared to instigate that fear, I must also be prepared to address that fear. Right? There are many ways to address it. Today is not the platform. That's why we have Dean Williams typologies, adaptive challenge typologies. Right? But for now, it's about ensuring that fear gets created, that fear gets instigated. Now I create the tension. Now I move them towards the destination by inventing. Right? Via inventing. So as a result, inventing at the end of the day is about dealing with your governing variables. Correct? I'm sure by now you know what they are. I've repeated this several times in this unit. Dealing with governing variables, getting them to practice double loop learning. Right? The problem right now that we are dealing with in many organizations is this: the traditional approach towards dealing with problems. Right? So the traditional approach towards dealing with problems is primarily based on your traditional strategic approach. Strategy, linear or circular? Strategic thinking, linear or circular? Linear. Right? Again, identify the problems, look at data, come up with alternate solution. Decide on the solution, craft the strategy. Take the strategy, put into action, implement. After implementation, evaluate. Correct? Then that evaluation gives us results. Then keep adjusting your strategy until you find a strategy that works. Understood? Single loop learning. You understand? Because you're constantly going back to adjust the strategy. Right? Alternate 1 doesn't work, go for alternative 2. Right? Alternative 2 doesn't work, go for alternative 3. And by the time I realize that nothing of this is going to work, I'm losing the race. You understand? Because in reality, I've not really learned. Got it? In a double loop learning situation, I correct my data. In double loop learning situation, I question my strategy. I don't modify it. I don't adjust it. I question it. Right? In a double loop environment, I will change almost everything that I started off with. That means in some situation or many situations, I must be daring enough to throw everything out of the window and start all over again. Right? Why? Because my governing variables at that point in time could have been right? But in a traditional approach, it has always taken a single loop learning approach. Got it? So which means this can work provided a few assumptions exist. Assumption number one, my problem is clear. Right? My problem is clear, my solutions are clear. Assumption number two, environment out there is stable. Environment out there is stable and gives me the information that I need. Right? Assumption number three, my goals are correct. And my strategic approach is appropriate. You understand? Assumption number four, I can measure the outcome clearly. Understood? So you see, all these assumptions are the ones that's driving this. Got it? So which one of these assumptions can we use in today's environment? Actually none. Right? Because to think that we have an accurate understanding of the environment, that's wrong. Because our understanding of an environment is always plausible, not accurate. Right? We got to accept that. You understand? That means vagueness is what we are dealing with. Right? Dynamism is what we are dealing with. Got it? And to come to a understanding that that problem can never be resolved quickly or overnight is an important belief. But to solve this problem means we got to constantly, continuously look at things differently. And that's where the more contemporary approach comes in. Right? The key contemporary approach over here is to constantly question everything that is going on. Right? That means constantly looking for redefinition of the problem. Constantly looking for reassigning the data. Constantly ensuring that we are coming up with new solutions all the time. That means in a more contemporary approach to deal with current environment, I got to be both proactive and reactive at the same time. Proactive, create my future. Right? Proactive, invent a new way of doing things. Reactive, when I invent, make sure that I understand that when it doesn't work, let's relook at this all over again. Right? Discard, look at something new, not restart. You understand? Actually, you must not get confused with this. I am not restarting anything. Right? Just because I'm constantly going back to governing variables, just because I'm questioning the strategy, doesn't mean I'm restarting. I'm actually discarding. Right? Now I'm looking at something entirely new. You understand? Am I moving forward? Am I moving forward? I am moving forward. Every time I realize something has not worked, right? And I look at something completely different, I'm actually moving forward. You understand? And this is where innovation, creativity becomes important. Right? So ultimately, the key requirement over here is to deal with creativity and innovation. Two key pillars for organization to succeed. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how small you are. It doesn't matter whether you're a global company. It doesn't matter whether you're a localized company. It doesn't matter whether you're a mom and pop shop. Right? Because everyone has to deal with dynamism today. Yes or no? Yes or no? Many of you come from countries where there are mom and pop shops. Yes? Yes? Are they under danger now? Are they under danger now? They're under danger because big corporations are coming and taking over the market. Okay? They are under serious danger as well. They need to decide how to get this problem resolved. You understand? Many of us, until today, are still stuck with the past. Okay? And like I said, unfortunately, business school like this does it as well. Keep you in the past. You understand? It's about the future, right? In fact, it is not even about the present today. Past and present is no longer playing a part. We need to start thinking about the future. The only thing about the present is to be absolutely clear that you are not there. Right? And this is where the constant opening up of the gap leads to creative tension. Right? And that creative tension is constantly looking for solutions we have never encountered before. Solutions that is no longer part of our repertoire. Solutions that we don't have. Right? That discovery is going to be the key. Got it? So let me pause here for a while. This is actually something not just told by DLM. It's not just about inventing. This is something that's been spoken about since the 90s. Has companies taken it seriously? No. Right? It's a classic example or a classic reality that we need to face up to. Our plans generally do not work today. Right? Our plans do not work today because by the time we go through the analysis of the plan, by the time we come up with a plan, by the time we put the plan into action, what has happened to the environment? The environment's already changed. Suddenly, a plan that you thought that is aligned to the environment, when you implement the environment shift, the alignment is gone. Right? And then you discover your plan is not working. Right? When you discover your plan is not working, then you react one more time. Understood? So you see, Henry Mintzberg identified two types of planning. One is your traditional strategic planning. The other is emergent planning. Right? So he said the reality of the world today for most organizations is you're not working with their deliberate plans. Because the deliberate plans generally do not work. You understand? Why? Because the deliberate plan think. Deliberate plan, are they thinking about the future or are they comparing against the past and the present? They are comparing against past and present. You understand? What have we done? Where we are now. That's it. Right? Where we want to go, that's already been determined on the basis I want to be a leader. Understood? So now they are taking this gap and they're trying to handle those gaps. Right? Are they likely to practice creativity and innovation? The answer is yes. But in a very, very limited way. Got it? Because they are still driven by their past. You understand? So, in his analysis, in his studies, which is true because it's been repeated many times over, what has been discovered is organizations fail to see something new popping up. Right? And by the time they see something new that has popped up, some other companies already picked it up and moving in a different direction. Got it? They're taking a different direction, but they're moving towards a destination that helps them thrive, not survive. You understand? So you see, this is where he said organization and managers in organization must become more aware of emergent strategy. Right? And there are many opportunities that are emerging. Many solutions, many opportunities to discover solutions are emerging. But many companies are stuck in their own ways. Right? So the reality of a plan is actually emergent, not deliberate. Right? So which means now if you want to create something more, if you want to deal with emergent, then create that emergent plan. How? Become more proactive. Right? That's why I told you, creating your future is important. You understand? Create that future. However absurd it may sound now, that's the future you have created for yourself. Now, direct your resources, direct people's mental models, direct people's mindset to work towards that future. Right? And that future is not about profit. Got it? That future is about how you're going to work towards differentiating yourself. Based on what? The underlying platform is your core purpose. So what's that purpose? Right? And never lose sight of this purpose with the values intact, because your vision is going to change. You understand? Your vision is going to change, your strategy is going to change, your plans are going to change. This will not change. Got it? And this becomes your driving principles. Right? So as a result, this is not new. Adaptive challenge, it's something Hayfetz talked about in the 90s. Right? The turn of the century, people like Mintzberg has already talked about the importance of dealing with emergent strategies. Strange. He talked about emergent strategies in the turn of the century. Until today, you will not find these in the strategic management. Right? That's the strangest thing that's been going on. Because people are still comfortable in their old ways. They believe that the process they have taken actually works. Do you understand? Which has been the most successful company? Continuous innovation or discontinuous innovation?
Continue.
Continuous or discontinuous?
Continue.
Discontinuous. They stop doing what the competitors are doing. They come up with something completely different. Right? They work towards creative destruction. Apple was discontinuous innovation. You understand? Right? When you look at CDs that came along, discontinuous innovation. Right? Netflix is discontinuous innovation. You all know that? You all know that? That's not continuous innovation. That's discontinuous innovation. Don't you think a provider like Netflix is killing all the video providers? Yes or no? Pretty much killed them. You see, discontinuous innovation. Right? Companies that do well out there and thrive are companies that work towards discontinuous innovation. Discontinuous innovation means there is no more connection from a previous version of a product and a new version of a product. There's no more connection. Right? That is where you find organizations tend to do things very differently. Why? Because they forecast. Because they are continuously identifying new ways of doing things. Okay? But to do that means knowledge must be created in an organization. Right? So that knowledge creation becomes absolutely critical. Understood? So, creativity and innovation is important in an organization, but for innovation to be existing, you must create knowledge. Understood? To create knowledge, you must have the right environment. Sounds familiar? Which model we used before to talk about this? See? Upload, download, delete. I talked about this before, last week.
The inner and outer model.
Yeah, whose model?
That chick.
That chick.
Sorry,
That's how you talk to me in my class.
sorry,
That chick. So disrespectful.
I forgot her name, but the machine, some more.
Don't ignore me. You are disrespectful. It's the person, not a chick. Understand? You can talk like that with your friends outside, not in my classroom. Tina Sil. Right? Innovation engine. Got it? So, at the end of the day, you need to have the right environment. That's what we're going to be looking at today. But, no direct translation for this word. It's a Japanese word. Does not have a direct translation. A simple definition of it is the right environment. That means the right context in the organization. There are many different contexts that are there. Doesn't matter which context, they only have one word. They will always use it as part. But in our case, we have different contexts. You understand? Which I'll talk about later on. So, at the end of the day, having that context is important. So this is where we are going to be looking at a model. And it's called the SECI model. Right? The article that you should have read before walking into this classroom, I told you last week. Did you read? Did you read? You still don't take me seriously. Right? Nonaka and Takayuchi. Okay? I already told you all, you lose sight of these articles, you will fail this unit. Right? Nonaka and Takayuchi. Article on knowledge creation. Got it? SECI primarily means socialization, externalization, combination, internalization. Right? These four primarily plays a part on knowledge creation. But for that to occur, you must have the right setting, right context, right environment. Right? That setting, context, environment becomes very important. What are you trying to pull together in trying to achieve the creation of knowledge in the organization? Remember, this is not knowledge management. This is knowledge creation. Got it? Knowledge management is taking current knowledge and then managing it and then delivering that to the rest of the people. Knowledge creation is constantly looking for new knowledge to be created within the organization. But new knowledge cannot be created in the organization if you don't have the right context. Right? So, what are we pulling together? People. The raw material over here are the people. Knowledge essence. Right? Not your artificial intelligence, not some arithmetic diagrams in your computers, but focusing on the most important knowledge asset, people. Right? So, before I talk about this, let's start looking at a broader concept of knowledge creation. Right? There are few capital that an organization needs to achieve. Got it? In fact, something similar is also highlighted for country management as well. Nationalistic outcome. But let's look at it from an organizational basis. There is economic capital. That's your profit. Right? Then you have human capital. That's the people. Then you have social capital. That's how you bring the people together. Then you have intellectual capital. The knowledge. You understand? The key over here is achieving the intellectual capital. Right? Human capital at the end of the day are the right assets or the assets that you bring into the organization. People come with knowledge. You understand? Even if someone who's never worked before, that person has got a unique lens of looking at things. Right? It's like a child, no? You know? When a child is not influenced by many things, the child will have an innocent look at many, many things. Agreed? So, it's about that. That knowledge has to be eventually cultivated. That means if knowledge has to be created, you have to start with individual levels of knowledge creation. Let them create that knowledge on their own. You understand? On their own, from their own experience, from their own expertise, from their own lens. That's human capital. Right? You cannot simply put people and say, I've got human capital. Doesn't work like that. Got it? So human capital ultimately is about allowing them to explore. Human capital ultimately is about allowing them to experience learning. Got it? But each individual knowledge is actually not useful for a company on its own. You understand? That means synergy has to be created among the people in the organization. Right? That synergistic link is called social capital. Social capital is not culture. Understand? Social capital is creating that environment where people interact and people share. And they're willing to share. So you see, holding environment becomes important. Right? So that social capital, that means when the knowledge begins to clash with each other, that leads to new knowledge. Understood? That new knowledge that gets created, it's called intellectual capital in the organization. Right? And that's where we want to focus on, that intellectual capital. So you see, if that intellectual capital gets formed, then that intellectual capital now affects human capital. Agreed? Agreed? Because now you've got new knowledge, will it affect people? Now it affects people, the process goes on. Right? So now that I've got knowledge creation in place, I've got intellectual capital in place, what happens to my economic capital? Will improve. You understand? So you see, my economic capital is not driving the business. It's the intellectual capital that drives the business. And at the end of the day, economic capital comes into play. Right? As an outcome of my objective of achieving intellectual capital. Understood? And this is where Nonaka and Takayuchi is coming from. Right? If some of you have read the article and find it confusing, this is exactly where they're coming from. This is the process that they have looked at. Right? Now, something in the 90s people thought, too much of this sexiness is being talked about. Right? But towards the end of the 90s and the turn of the century, the companies who started doing well in the environment were not companies who were repeating manufacturing over and over and over again. Right? It was companies who were practicing knowledge creation. Knowledge-oriented companies, companies who invested heavily into knowledge, are the ones who began to actually exploit the market better. Right? So, at the end of the day, knowledge creation is a learning process within the organization. Right? Where both exploration and exploitation occurs. Using human knowledge, sharing human capital, right? But at the same time, utilizing technology. So they also talked about the importance of technology to make sure this knowledge gets shared. So they did not ignore the importance of communication technology, right? And the right cultural environment. Understood? In order to create intellectual capital. That is knowledge creation. Right? So a few things that appears over here. Exploration and exploitation. Keep those two words in mind, because that's part of dealing with paradox. Right? Exploration, exploitation. Allow people to explore knowledge. Once the knowledge is created, exploit that knowledge. Right? How do you exploit and explore the knowledge? Human sharing. Sharing of knowledge among people. Right? How do you eventually share that knowledge? Technology comes in. How do you piece all of this together? Cultural environment. Right? And what is the focus? Intellectual capital. That's the focus. Got it? So that is the background when it comes to reading Nonaka and Takayuchi. Right? Two things that appears in the article as well. So these are some of the words I want to clarify so that if you've read, then you should know what they're talking about. One, they use epistemology as an outcome. The other, they use ontology. That means epistemological approach and ontological approach. Right? Why? Because they recognize the importance of individual learning. Every individual has got a unique way of learning. And that uniqueness of learning is epistemological learning. That's why they use the word epistemology. Right? But ultimately, in organization, knowledge, organizational level knowledge, comes from sharing. Right? And that connection between my knowledge and your knowledge coming together is the ontological aspect of an organizational intellectual capital. Understood? And that's why they use these two terms. Right? So they were a little bit more philosophical in their discussion. Right? Hello, understood so far? And the two levels of knowledge that they talked about is picking from a previous study in the 60s by a guy called Michael Poliani. Right? So from there, they picked up two levels of knowledge, tacit and explicit knowledge. Some of you in this room, OB, I would have talked to you about it. What's the difference? I'm sure I spoke about it in OB. Tacit and explicit knowledge. What's the difference? Can you replicate your mother's cooking? Can you replicate your mother's cooking? Why not? But she teach you what? She taught you right. She taught you right. But is it the same?
No.
Why not?
Different hand.
Different hand. You can take her hand and do it yourself, it will still be different. See, there are some knowledge you can never teach. Right? That's why Polanyi say, we can know something we can never teach. Got it? That means something is so intuitive in us. Something that we do very intuitively. Like that, we make decisions. Right? And we are able to get jobs done without even thinking too much about it. But when people ask you how, you cannot explain. You find it difficult and you struggle to teach them how to do it. Right? And even if you do teach them, they can never get it right. Agree? Hello, agree? I'm sure you've experienced that. That is called tacit knowledge. Right? A knowledge that cannot be taught. A knowledge that cannot be explained. Which means a knowledge I cannot put it in an email and send it to people. Right? Technical knowledge, explicit knowledge, I can do that. Specs and datas and all those things I can teach. How do you eventually convert that to something tangible? I can teach. That is every individual. Right? So, the key over here to understand SCCI, how do we take this tacit knowledge, surface that into the open, and then pick it up? So you see, explore, exploit. You understand? And then make sense out of this. And then send this back to people. That is called SCCI. Understood? So let's take a break. When you come back, I'll talk you through this framework.